Good morning, everybody. How's everyone doing? Welcome to the first day of Sónar+D. Over the next couple of days, you're going to hear from some of the most interesting minds in creativity and technology. And we're going to start today with visions of how VR and AR will affect your life in the future. There's also an area called Realities that's in the next building over there where you'll get to see some VR and AR yourselves. But for right now, I want to introduce Michelle Greenwald to introduce the panel, and here they go.
Okay, so I am a professor. I sort of specialize in digital marketing and innovation, and I'm thrilled to be here today. We're with two pioneers in the field of AR, VR, and XR. Monika Bielskyte, who is from, well, she's really actually lives all over the world. She's a fascinating background. She works in the area, she's a futurist and content strategist for AR, VR, and XR, and she works in film, entertainment, technology, and with governments. And then we have Lila Alemany, who works for Google, and she heads Google's initiatives on VR, XR, AR with global clients. And they approach the field, they've come from different perspectives, and together it's a really great complement to get some insights into where VR is today, how it got to where it is, and where it's going in the future. And I'm going to have each of them introduce themselves, tell you a little bit more about their backgrounds and how they came into the field. So if you'd like to start.
Thank you, yeah. So my name is Lila. I'm actually originally from Barcelona, so I'm thrilled to be home. I work at Google in New York. I lead our AR and VR initiative for our global clients. So I spend a lot of time thinking about how people are going to be used these technologies across a wide range of sectors, from healthcare, productivity, nutrition, creativity. Also, we spend a lot of time thinking about how to make these technologies available and helpful for everybody. Before Google, I worked in media and tech strategy and investing for startups and big corporations. And before that, I was actually in Barcelona. I led a small media production shop. We created digital content and TV, media, film. And actually, one of my favorite projects was a circus show that we did with two iconic Catalan singers, Lluís Llach and Albert Pla. We turned that into a 3D film. So you could say my passion for a long time has been this intersection between creativity, business, and media. So thrilled to be here. Of course, it's very fitting for Sónar, and very much looking forward to learning from Monika and from you.
Hi, I'm Monika Bielskyte. My passport is Lithuanian, but as Michelle mentioned, I'm a bit of a digital nomad. I travel the world searching for visions of the future. My big focus is actually on the global south, looking at non-Western, let's say non-North American, non-European visions of the future. Historically as well as in the present day. And I like to call myself more of a future designer rather than a futurist, though I get labeled as such. One of the quite few, really not many futurists with a creative rather than technological or scientific background. And as much as I spend time at the bleeding edge of science and technology, I always try to help people see how it connects also with social, creative, political innovation, rather than just staying in the domain of science and tech. Now, again, as Michelle mentioned, I work in entertainment industry, mostly with Hollywood, designing fictional story worlds for sci-fi properties. But I also work with technology companies, helping them see contextual futures, sort of geopolitical, socio-cultural context in which their products, platforms, technologies would be set in, so they wouldn't be designing in a vacuum, but actually for the potential and possibilities of the real world. And last but not least, I am very involved, as of more recently, with the real places, cities and countries, in helping them design fictional futures, again, for their reality. Now, AR, VR, MR has entered my life at its third wave. So just as Oculus was being sold to Facebook I started being really interested in space, specifically for the potential of prototyping these fictional futures and letting people be fully immersed in the possibilities of what our life and the world could be.
Okay, so the way this is going to work is that each of the speakers is going to provide a presentation of the work that they're doing and what are the big challenges that they see going forward. Then I'm going to ask a few questions, and then we're going to open it up to the audience. So, Monika?
Great.
I'm sorry, Lila's going first.
No worries. All right. So I'm going to talk for about 7-8 minutes, and then Monika will talk for about 7-8 minutes, and then we'll have some questions. So I want to talk about the why and the what. Why AR and VR are so important for Google, and also show you some examples of what we're working on. So the why. We live on what we say the cusp of the fourth technological revolution, which is this shift to immersive. The first technological revolution was when the PCs, personal computers, entered our offices and our homes. The second one was when the internet connected our computers into a network. The third one is when we put computers into our pockets. And the fourth one is this shift into immersive. And we think that this fourth wave of technology will be as powerful and profound as the other ones have been in the past. And it will impact everything we do, from the way we work, to the way we interact, to the way we shop, to the way we learn. So what do we mean by immersive computing? What's this immersive shift? So if you think about the origin of search, it was basically a technology that understood text, right? You could type a question, and the technology would understand a text. 2-3 years ago, we launched Google Voice Assistant. Now you can talk to the computer, you can ask questions, it feels much more human. And this shift, the last shift, really is for technology to see what we see. So vision is one of our most important senses. And with Google Lens, we will be able to have technology see what we see. So how many of you know about Google Lens or have heard of it? Okay, a few. So when we talk about this immersive computing, we're thinking about technology that acts more like we do. So with Lens, you basically have your phone. You can point at the world or point at an object, and it can recognize the thing that you're looking at, and it can provide more information. So it's basically visual search. So as I was saying, search has gone from text to voice to vision, and this shift, which we call immersive, is just making technology more like we do. So here you have an example of, I go to bookstores. I really like to know more information about the books that I'm browsing. So right now I have to text the author of the title. With Lens, I can just point my phone to the book, lens it, and it will provide more information. The second example here is a receipt. It turns out that we take a lot of pictures of sunsets and selfies, but 15% of the pictures that we take are actually utility-based. So those are receipts, their bank statements, their recipes. So with Lens, I can just point at the receipt in this case. It will understand it's a receipt, and it will also take an action, so we can add it to my expense report. And the last one there, which you can really see, is, for example, Monika's wearing a really cool outfit. I can lens her, and it will tell me what she's wearing, what the designer, and probably buy it. So why is this important for AR and VR, and how does AR and VR fit into this immersive computing shift? So when we think about the real world, we live in a 3-dimensional world. But when we think about our digital world, we live in a 2D-dimensional world. So we live in a world trapped in screens. What AR and VR can do is basically bring the digital world into these 3 dimensions and make it more helpful, more useful. So, we have this flat world here because we say that if Galilei lived today, he would say that our digital world is flat. So this AR, VR, what it will do, it will blur the boundaries between the physical and the digital world. And we think that by making it more seamless, it will make technology more helpful, more human. So in this case, when we talk about virtual reality, we say that VR can bring anything to you, and augmented reality can bring anything to you from the world. So this is one of my favorite examples, the one on the left. This is Susan. She's a cancer patient in London in a hospice. She's from Jerusalem, and she can't travel to Jerusalem. So she got this VR headset with Google Earth, and she could walk around Jerusalem, the Jerusalem of her childhood. And it's a really funny video. If you haven't seen it, please do, because you'll see her screaming, "This is amazing!" And then the one example on the right, augmented reality can bring anything to you from the world, is these kids who are studying Da Vinci. Instead of learning about Da Vinci through a text, they can use augmented reality and bring this object that was designed by Da Vinci as a helicopter for the 15th century. So the reason why we think this is important is because the hypothesis is that more immersive is more engaging is more helpful, more human, makes technology more useful for humans. So we actually did some research with a media agency called Mindshare and also some neuroscientists. And what we saw when we scanned the brains of people who had consumed information in 2 dimensions and 3 dimensions is that when you consume information in 3 dimensions, you retain and you understand the information much better. So here you can see the scan of these 2 brains. The one on the right, you can see that there is a much higher cognitive activity. This is huge, and we'll continue to research into this. But if this is true and we can prove it's true, it would basically validate our hypothesis that immersive computing can indeed be much more helpful for humans in how we learn, in how we interact, in how we communicate. And you might be wondering, well, we've been hearing about AR and VR for a long time. Is this really happening now? And we believe that it is. This really shift is happening now. On the left, you have the estimate for AR-ready phones in 2018. We estimate that it's going to be 800 million, and this is because instead of having separate headsets, which is what we had to do with VR, we just can use our phone. So AR Core and AR Kit, which are the AR platforms that iPhone and Android have launched to the market last year, will lead to these huge numbers. And then on the right, you have for VR, 200 million devices in 2018. So the audience is definitely there, the reach is there, and this is really unprecedented, and it's in the last few months. So I want to talk to you about the what very briefly. I mentioned earlier that we believe that this shift to immersive computing and making technology more human will have an impact in everything we do. So I want to show you an example of what that means, in how we work, how we play, how we create, how we shop. So this is, how we play, how we create. This is one of my favorite AR apps. It's called Just a Line. If you haven't tried it, please do. You can basically draw on AR. So what you see here is this British artist, Chantel Martin. She's been experimenting with this for a while. And she said something that I really liked, which is that with AR, the world becomes a creative canvas. She can use any surface, any space to create. Second example is education. So Google launched Expeditions, which is the immersive tools for kids. Here you see in VR, but also in AR. 3 million kids have used it. Again, we've done some research on this, and the results in terms of educational impact are really, really interesting. Then how we shop. As you know, a lot of our shopping is moving online. I think the global estimate is around 10%, but for some countries that goes up to 20%, and for some categories it's up to 50%. So some things are very easy to buy online, like books. Some other things are really not easy, like electrodomestics or clothes, and AR is going to change that. So on the left, I have to buy a new washing machine, but I don't have time or the appetite to go to a showroom. So with AR, I can just place the object in my environment, and I can see how it fits in my house. And on the right-hand side, I want to change my hair color. I want to try on a new pair of jeans. I will be able to use my virtual avatar and just try it on online. And of course, this is going to have a big impact on advertising. And Google is working on 2 different areas. So the one on the left is out of home. This is a movie poster for Star Wars. With this AR component, you're basically adding a layer of playfulness to it. And then on the right-hand side, this is a box. Imagine it could also be a cereal box for Nestle, or any kind of packaging that you can imagine. And again, you can add a layer of utility or entertainment to it. And then finally, how we work. We think that AR and VR will change a lot of the professions. This is an example of an AR microscope that Google recently launched. It detects cancerogenic cells and it highlights them in AR, so it really helps pathologists in diagnosing and basically enabling them to do their job much faster and better. So lots of examples. We're really thrilled about this new technology and can't wait to see what you'll do with it.
Great. Okay, Monika.
Can we put my presentation in? Nope. Yeah, so I love that Lila provided a more practical and applied information. I'd like to add a little bit of a maybe philosophical layer. And this introduction is called Virtuality to Shared Reality, and hopefully by the end you'll understand what I mean with that. So the premise really is that the digital world will soon enough be enmeshed with a physical world in such a way that our reality becomes a transparency mode that we choose. What do I mean by that? Today we're seeing virtual reality as sort of this digital space that we're entering with our physical bodies, and augmented reality as digital overlay onto the physical world. Now, mixed reality is actually seen as digital integration, digital content, digital interaction integration within our physical world that makes it almost indistinguishable from physical reality and its augmentations. Where we are going, though, these three branches will merge, and we will be having one device that somehow combines the functionalities of all of that. So, of course, that is what we are sort of seeing, right? The lens and the brain-computer interface, we're still far from there, yet that is the direction where we're heading. That digital overlay and digital integration will change its opacity, its transparency, as we will be moving through our personal, professional lives, through time and space and different activities within it. So, maybe the most important thing to understand is that VR, AR, MR is not just another gadget. It's not just another thing, it's not just another means to solve problems or to entertain ourselves. Fundamentally, it is the paradigm shift in computation. We're leaving rectangular screens behind and stepping into computational space where the world becomes our desktop. So what does that mean? What does it mean when we're not watching it anymore? We are actually in it. This becomes a visceral medium where we could be affected in ways equally fabulous and absolutely terrifying. When we believe that certain things that are not happening to our physical bodies, yet the trauma we could experience could definitely be physical. A lot of conversation has been had around the storytelling in virtual reality. And I feel the whole premise of that is wrong. If you're trying to make me do certain things and look in certain places within the virtual space, you just want to create a virtual frame. And so you're defeating the purpose of what this medium allows. So we're leaving the content frame and we're entering the experience matrix that we've been moving and interacting with. And so in some way, the main character, the main interaction that we are having is not with people or creatures that we'd be encountering and talking with or solving problems with. It is actually with the space. The space itself has to be alive and dynamic. And interaction within that, of course, is key. A movie exists even if nobody is watching. Immersive experience does not. It is actually what me as a user, or I would rather say as a human, that steps into it. And what do I do within it? What do I feel within it? What do you make me feel that really matters? So I'll say, fuck techno-fetishism. We've been so obsessed with hardware and platforms, but VR is not that. VR is really, as well as AR and MR, it's really about experience. So much of investment has been going exclusively into developing new hardware, new platforms, and very little has been invested into the R&D of content. So as much, again, as all of these things are important, the emphasis has been put a little too much on one edge, rather than actually understanding how we would not be dragging the old media into the new medium space. Because as we know, that'd be like pushing a square peg into the round hole. Technological progress without humanitarian evolution always equals dystopian future. That is an evergreen equation that I coined a little while ago, and it just never keeps changing. We need to just watch Keiichi Mitsuda's Hyperreality or Charlie Brooker's Black Mirror to understand how the merge of digital and physical world could go terribly wrong. Now, that sounds quite scary, although I am an enthusiast. I work in this field, and specifically, I want to think about it critically because that is the only way how we could do it right. And doing it right has never been more urgent than it is today. So what we need is not more technology-driven experiences, but rather experience-driven technology. If it's only good because it's new, it won't be good for long. As Bruce Sterling says, we have to look at it from the point of view that is already passé and create it that way. So may it not be just a tool for escapism. Movies such as Steven Spielberg's Ready Player One show this dystopian world where the only thing that we can do to escape our reality is step into that digital space and completely ignore what happens to this real world and the people that inhabit it. What interests me is how instead of just escaping it, we could think how we could use it to expand the human potential. So what I meant by fuck techno-fetishism is really, could we stop seeing it as this external thing to us, as something that has an agency of its own, and start seeing it as a tool, as a means to expand the human potential. Intellectually, yes, but also emotionally, physically, and creatively. And last but not least, how could it be a means to hack the human experience? So much focus is going into recreating reality in the virtual space. But could we find a whole new way to experience the world? And amazing work such as marshmallow laser feasts in the eyes of an animal does show that when we get to see the world and move through the world through the eyes of the animal. And so could we do that? Could we bring that digital possibility space into the real world? Not just escape, but go there so we could bring back that new knowledge and new understanding. And I want to finish with my favorite quote by Audrey Tang, who said, when we hear user experience, let's think about human experience. And when we hear virtual reality, let's make it a shared reality. Thank you so much. These are just a few glimpses into virtual project development that maybe can give you an idea of what this world could be.
Okay, so my first question is a combined question for Lila. How does a brand developer get started creating AR, VR, and does it have to be very expensive and complex?
Just to Monika's point, because when you were saying that we have to ground these experiences on the human, this is actually one of our obsessions. And when we talk to creators or brands, and they just say, I want to do AR, I want to do PR, I want to do VR for PR reasons, we are constantly saying no. You have to think about the user, we call it the user, you call it the human. What's the need? And does this technology make sense for it or not? So completely agree with that point. In terms of how to get started, I mentioned the new AR platform that Google launched called AR Core. In the last 6 months, people have, I think, uploaded 300 different apps. So this is a very user-friendly platform for developers. What we've seen is that creating 3D assets, 3D objects, is not necessarily easy or cheap. So we've built 2 apps. One is called Tilt Brush, the other one is called Blocks, which developers can use to create 3D assets. But I think the most important thing that Google has launched recently, it's called Poly. It's a library which has a commons license, so anybody can use the hundreds of thousands of 3D assets that are there and remix it. And it's a library of 3D assets that developers can use to create their own apps. So I would say our obsession, again, is to make this technology available and helpful. So we've built the hardware, the software around it, so creators and developers can build experiences. I would say AR Core is our platform. For iOS, it's ARKit, and then the two apps, Tiltbrush and Blogs.
Great. So for Monika, what are key considerations to create really great content? It can be from a technological standpoint, but also from a storytelling standpoint.
Yeah, so actually, also playing back into what you said, I think Google is one of the very few companies that's been heavily focused on understanding what we could do that space and what is that bigger picture as AR, VR, XR being the future of computation. Now, what I like to do, of course, thinking about how we could be creating better stuff is, again, bring it back into reality. A lot of developers have been, and the background from which they come, have been very focused on just thinking in the digital realm. But for me, first, I think we should study reality. How do things make us feel in the real world? And understand that the immersive space becomes that times 10. Our mind gets tricked very easily into believing that we are in reality. And we can get triggered in ways that are really, really intense. If the spreadsheet pops into our eyeballs, if colors or shapes are aggressive and infringing on our physical space, that becomes an incredibly unpleasant experience. So what really interests me, and what I always suggest to developers, designers, creators, is to really study how things make us feel in the real world, and how could we smooth over these edges, add the magic, and make it so that it's not just recreation of the best real experiences, but there's a whole new layer added to that, yet in a way that is respectful to our psychology.
Okay, super. So, Lila, what do you think are some of the benefits and also the challenges of AR, VR, and XR?
Yeah, great question. I think the benefits, as I was saying, is that it can really help us do things, and it can really make us, when we talk to developers, we say that AR and VR gives you superpowers, because it allows you to shift your attention to do activities much faster, or even more productive, or more efficiently, or better, or into new realms that you haven't even considered before. So there is a whole creative potential that I think is really interesting. At the same time, when you talk about dystopian future, if we think about how now the digital world will be able to overlay into our real world, we really don't want this wonderful real world full of digital stuff all the time. So of course, the big challenge here is to understand when can the digital world blended into reality really be helpful to humans. As we saw, I think, with that old lady, Susan, being able to take her to her hometown is extraordinary. Now, she probably doesn't want to be there all the time. So again, when we think about these experiences, both for AR, for VR, but especially for AR, we see them as micro moments, we call them. So if we want to make it really helpful, these are probably going to be glimpses. So I want to learn, I want to see, I want to buy, I want to do. They're very glimpses when digital can add a level of helpfulness. And I think when people think about Google, they think about how it helps me being helpful. But we certainly don't want the digital world onto the real world all the time.
Right.
So I think the balance is really where the challenge is going to be.
Right. Okay, so I'm going to ask one more question of Monika, and then we're going to open it up to you. So besides immersive technology, you've also been very involved in world design. And how do you see these two connected?
Yeah, so I actually come from the world design. I work with entertainment industry in crafting out these multi-platform immersive story worlds. That means designing a world that would not just be what we see in a frame of the movie or series, but also thinking how it could become a game, a VR experience, merchandise, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So what is, of course, fascinating with that is when you are designing it, you are thinking of the entire universe and everything within it, how it functions. If somebody's eating a certain kind of food, it needs to be produced somewhere. If society is structured in a particular way, then that's how people's homes look and that's how they work. However, in the mediums that we have today, we get only a glimpse of that. What's interesting for me with the immersive media tech is that we could truly enter those spaces. And now, if we shift from the science fiction story worlds into how this could be applied to reality, is that we could be way less didactic with the kind of content that could raise people's awareness. So a simple example, climate issues, climate change, climate pattern disruption. Instead of telling you that, look, that's how beautiful our nature is, like Planet Earth or Blue Planet does, or environmental change movies say, oh, this is really, really terrible what is happening. I could actually help you enter 3 alternative scenarios. One scenario is we have done nothing and things just continue degrading themselves. Another scenario, well, we started reducing some of our degenerative action. And in a certain scenario, it's a paradigm shift of a new world where we're really moved towards behavioral change. And if instead of just watching and seeing the data, you could actually step into that data and see how your actions change the world and how you are affecting it. Now, all of a sudden, you are starting to make these choices in a way that is much more visceral. So for me, what really interests is how we could be crafting out these simulations of possible potential futures and inviting people to change how they think and how they act of themselves in the world and of the world.
Great. Okay, so we're going to open it up to questions. Anybody have any questions? Do we have a microphone or? We do. Okay.
My name is Adriana. My question goes more about impacting also people that has different kinds of diseases or more on the rehab or even people that are truly need to cope with pain. Some of those have been big breakthroughs on VR on that, and how you guys see in the future.
Yeah, I can take part of it if you want. So one of the research studies that we're doing is around using VR with psychologists and people who have phobias. It's really interesting, some of the results that are coming back. People who have phobias to heights, people who have phobias to different sorts of animals. As you were saying, the fact that you can immerse yourself into a different reality and think that you're touching those animals or you're in a big height place, it really starting to change and have a very positive impact on people who have some of those diseases. The other big thing that we've seen, as I showed, for people who can't move, people with disabilities, the idea that you can walk, that you can run, that you can swim, that's another huge area where we're seeing really interesting results for VR. I don't know if you have some examples there.
Yeah, sure. So, of course, everything for the rehabilitation of paraplegic patients is really huge. But I also want to talk about something that is not, where we haven't arrived yet to the level of disease, or we think we haven't. So many of us today are dealing with different psychological issues. Loneliness, anxiety, insomnia, etc., etc., etc. And unless we are heavily medicating ourselves, we don't see them as massive problems. Now, I see that as a potential massive market and a means to do good business also while doing something great. So what really shocks me is how much money has been actually going into first-person shooter games and violence and horror-based content, whereas the world is really waiting for the kind of content that could help us to feel more at home, more peaceful, that could allow us to sleep, that could allow us also to, again, expand our understanding and knowledge. Now, interesting ways also how be doing that taps into what's the future of user experience and user interface. And as Lila mentioned, it is a combination, right, of eye tracking, voice commands. But the last point is also where we're going, EEGs will be integrated into the head-mounted displays. Now, there's two amazing avenues for that. One is that you'd be able to understand better how you're reacting to a specific type of content. And the content could be adjusted to that. So the content could calm itself or render itself more intense, et cetera, right? It could also help you understand what do you have issues with. Because sometimes we're not fully aware of that. Now, the dystopian angle of that is actually already being deployed in China, where EEG is embedded within the AR headsets in the workplaces, and you might be completing your task perfectly well. However, if you are getting stressed or tired or anxious, you might be fired just for your psychological state, not considering what you actually do. So as always, amazing possibilities and then some really scary avenues.
Great. Anybody else have a question? Okay.
Thank you. What mechanisms do you anticipate to allow people to control their collaboration in this new joint AR/VR space in public?
What do you mean? Tell me a little bit more.
Privacy,
Right.
individual rights, selection of presentation, etc.
Yeah, I mean, that's one of the biggest questions, not just with AR, VR, but with digital in general, right? I think, what I can say is that Google, and especially Google engineers, are obsessed about privacy. It's been a huge issue for us for a long time. And I think VR and AR is just another layer of what that means in digital. For us, whenever we treat individual data, that's always a no-go. Like for Google, there are so many obstacles to get to individual data, and that's definitely an area of obsession, not just for the organization, but for our engineers. But you're completely right. It's when I said I can lens Monika and I can figure out the clothes that she's wearing, and I really like them and I want to buy them. There is an issue there. The challenge, though, is that I can take a picture of Monika right now, and then I can go and search. It's just going to take me more time. Lensing it just makes that easier. So, yeah, it's a constant, I think, conversation that we want to have when we bring that digital reality into the world. But I think privacy is an ongoing discussion that we have.
Yeah, so if I can add to that, of course, the major issue is that, and that's what will precipitate encrypted and blockchain-based platforms, is that not only it knows, like right now, the search knows what we're searching for, what YouTube videos we watched, etc., where we're going, the platforms would know how we were feeling watching that kind of stuff. It would know how long we were watching one or other particular area. And the reality is we will give up that information because that is the only thing that will allow these experiences be smooth and fluid and really deliver to our expectations. So hopefully the bigger players will actually really opt for transparency and privacy laws, because otherwise we might find ourselves in a very, very tricky place. Another thing that I might add to what you were saying, what particularly fascinates me is how VR could be not that isolation space, VR, AR, MR, but actually a space of belonging, co-creation, and participation. And the avenues it opens right now as our physical world becomes more closed off, the avenues that it opens to make the physical borders obsolete. How via AR, VR, XR, and robotic peripherals, we could find ourselves in a country and do things that we could not normally be physically allowed. And again, that's an amazing opportunity for the ones that are being excluded, and especially from the countries that are unable to travel as freely, no matter their diplomas and awards and all that kind of stuff. But also it will mean a whole lot of other stuff that might endanger our lives.
Okay, I think we have Yeah.
one more thing to touch on that. I think you mentioned something really important, which is having the choice, right? Like having the choice to opt in versus opt out. And I think as an individual, because I know that if I opt in to giving certain information, the value of that technology is so much greater. It's going to be so much more helpful that I might want to opt in. But then, I know that I'm giving up certain information. What I know, at least for Google, is that the individual information will never be accessed. It's all in an aggregate. But I think as an individual user, it's that dichotomy. And the question will be ongoing as to how much do I want to opt in? Same with the phones. At the end of the day, this is so helpful and valuable to me. But there is also some challenges that come with having the phone next to us all the time.
Yeah, which is why healthy competition between the platforms and the hardware producers will be healthy.
Okay, so we have time for one more question. Go ahead, gentleman in the back. Yeah. You had your hand up before. Yeah.
I have two. Sorry. One is very, very specific for Lila. When you say 200 million devices for VR, you say capable devices or real glasses in the market?
Yeah, it's a combination of both, cardboard and different single devices for VR. It's a combination of both, yeah.
Okay. And the other one is for Monika. I have the experience working with Be Another Lab from here, from Barcelona, with the machine to be another. And they use a kind of interaction that can be called augmented virtuality, that they use directly human interaction. Okay, it's you are living in the experience of another person, recorded 180, and if someone is giving the hand to you, someone is giving directly the hand. And it's very nice because we are always thinking in devices to do smells, but you don't need a robot hand to touch you. You just need another person to touch you.
Yeah, so I am a huge fan of Be Another Lab. They are truly, truly wonderful as creators, as innovators, as people. No surprise, actually, a lot of them actually have background in neuroscience, which for me seems fundamental, understanding how a brain perceives things in order to do something that is truly innovative. Yes, indeed, it's amazing to be in the virtual experience and actually have a person manipulate your body in different ways to change, augment your perception of reality. Now, that is not always possible. It can be amazing in the case of especially medical applications, right? With the help of certain physical immersion, digital immersion, as well as sort of physical support, we could definitely help people heal in ways that we could never before. But that is not always accessible. So that's where the haptics come in and all devices kind of built around that. We have to think that where we're going, it is fully immersive experiences that for now are very expensive or necessitate fairly complex setups such as Be Another Lab. In the future, they'll become smaller and easier and more sort of malleable to use, sort of haptic exoskeleton suits, et cetera, which again presents incredible opportunities, but also dangers. And it's important to think about that, to think that where we're going, we're not just going to be watching it and hearing it, we will truly be feeling with the entirety of our body, and also we might have additional senses added to us, senses and layers of understanding of the world that we do not yet possess, which is fabulous and, again, terrifying in some ways, but definitely an opportunity we should take on and think about it in a way that is engaged.
Great. Thank you very much. Great.